Looks like we have had a few more people to join us, and thank you all for dialing in. Matt's going to kind of take over the conversation, and I'll go ahead and let everyone know so Matt doesn't have to, that we are hoping that you'll keep your video, your camera on if you can during the session, so that we can just talk face to face, and we're hoping to kind of have a collegial, casual conversation. So if you can do that, that would be great. But otherwise, I will let Matt take it away. Matt.
Thanks so much, Kim, and thanks everybody for joining. Great to see you all for this conversation. And yeah, I think as Kim mentioned, we really want to keep it a conversation, so please don't be shy. The advantage of a small room like this, I think, hopefully will show its effect here. I'm happy to chat through. We put together, I think, if you're here, you saw the listing for this, a couple of sentence description. So I'm happy to chat through any and all of those things, and I'm also happy to just chat through any questions that you all have too. I thought maybe I could kick it off rather than just sort of tell you any kind of boilerplate about me, which I think you probably either already read or Kim mentioned. I'll just open it up and say I can speak to one thing off the bat, which I think is kind of a somewhat funny story for me personally, to the point of how to find the right mentor, which I think is very important, and one of the most important things, frankly, for your career. I wouldn't even say necessarily early on. I think for me as a journalist, a huge part of why I love being a reporter is that I feel like I am learning every single day. It's always exciting and interesting in that way. So, but one of my sort of informal mentors, this was back in I guess it would have been 2010. I was a cub reporter covering cops and courts for a small daily newspaper in Northern California, the Eureka Times-Standard. And there was this reporter at a new nonprofit at the time called California Watch. Her name is Christina Jewett, and she had written about a couple nursing home companies that I was writing about. At the time, I was writing about this big class action lawsuit. I'm just going to let people in as they come in. This big class action lawsuit against this nursing home chain. I won't bore you with the details, but the point is Christina wrote a very short story mentioning one of these companies. And I thought, wow, this is a reporter that like I want to be someday. And like, how cool is it that she's covering the same thing? And she wasn't really covering it, but there's just that she mentioned it in anything, And I was like, wow, this is so neat. And so I just called her up. I just cold called her at her desk in the newsroom in Sacramento and said, hey, my name is Matt Drange. How can I be like you? And I literally just, that was it. And I think she was a little bit like, who the heck is this guy? And turned around and sort of said, well, my editor, Bob Saladay, is looking for an intern this summer. Would you be interested in that? Absolutely. And like, literally it was, I just called her and basically just like asked, hey, can you help me out? And it sounds kind of silly, but I've seen that happen, and I've had that happen time and time again, where I feel like most journalists in particular, and I think people in general, most journalists want to help people, right? I mean, we're doing this because we want to do it. You're not doing this to get rich, and you're probably not doing it to get famous. So, I think I wouldn't underestimate that. And so I just wanted to throw that out there as like an example for me of how I found mentors in the past. And yeah, I'm happy to talk through any questions, any points that you all want to talk to. So maybe open it up. Does anybody have anything they want to chat about with the whole room? I think if you just unmute yourself too, which you should be able to, anybody can kick it off here if you like. Otherwise, I can talk, but we don't want this to be me talking at you either for an hour. Anybody?
I have a quick one, Matt, if you don't mind. Yeah. My name is James, and I'm actually going to be starting at Insider, Business Insider, as a fellow on the investing team in about a month, actually. So I'm super excited about that. Just graduated Friday, so from James Madison University. So I'm really excited about that. Thank you, appreciate it. Maybe
my brother and sister went to JMU. Good for you, James.
Go Dukes. But Matt, if we get back in person, maybe I'll see you around the office. But regardless, I was wondering I've got these 6 months guaranteed And then we'll see from there if they like me over there. But I'm wondering what I can do in my first month or two to really set myself apart from some of my peers. What are things you've noticed that really qualities and traits that successful, fellows or new hires in my position embody and emulate? And then what are some common mistakes to avoid? Maybe like one or two of each. I'd really appreciate that. Thank you again.
Sure. Happy to chat about that, and I'll try to speak to both of you, but also I think most of this will apply to anywhere too. And I guess I should also the caveat of saying I am still the new guy here. I've been here at Business Insider for about 3 months, so I am by no means an expert on the company or anything, but I'm happy to address all of those. I would say to your first point, I think your first one about just sort of how to stand out, how to separate yourself. I think Business Insiders, like most places, we value go-getters, people who are self-starters, people who can go out and find a good story and sink their teeth into something. And I think especially when you're starting out, but really on any beat, to just try and find something with your editor that you really think you can own. It doesn't have, you're not going to own everything, but like if you can find one thing, one company that you're writing about, one particular niche, like at the beginning of the SPAC craze, there were only a few people writing about it. Those people, I think, are pretty authoritative now, like things like that. If you can find something that either that you're passionate about, that you're coming in with expertise about, that you feel for whatever reason you can sort of source up quickly and get up to speed quickly, try to make that a focal point. And it's always a game of opportunity cost, right? You can't do, there's only so many hours in the week, you can't do everything. And so you kind of have to know, and this is I think one of the trickiest parts of the job, but you kind of have to know when to really like try and double down on something, and when to do, I don't want to say the minimal viable product here. That sounds terrible. And I'm also not an editor, by the way, so I don't, I'm not hiring you. Don't, take this with a grain of salt. But to know when, hey, I'm going to do what's needed to be done for this story, but then this other story that for next week or whatever, I'm really gonna, I'm gonna do extra on there. I'm gonna do something different on that, and just, knowing when to differentiate that. So like if to use a baseball analogy, try to hit a double and a bunt versus like 2 singles, if that makes sense. So I think that's one way. And then just like, don't be shy too. I mean, I think that's another thing. Like, Business Insider is a big company. We're all like this right now. We're all pretty remote. So when you get here, shoot me a Slack. We'll talk. And likewise, anybody else here, everybody here is pretty friendly and accessible. So I think you're coming in at a good point.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and the last thing you said, as far as what to avoid.
One other thought to that last point. Say yes to everything. That's the first piece of advice, right? The second piece of advice is get in the time machine, go back 6 months, and find out what we forgot to follow up on. Because journalists are really bad about this. We pointed out a trend 6 months ago. We never came back to see if it died or if it was bigger than ever. So there's always a follow up to be done, and it gives you some great story ideas. And then just pay attention, right? The best thing you can do, in my opinion, especially if you're going to cover investing, is you talk to investors. You you talk to an investor every single day. You build up a long list of people, and you expose your vulnerability. Hey, Mr. Hotshot Investor, I'm new on this beat. I'm trying to make a name for myself. What do you see out there that's not being covered? What can I do, right? And people like that love to share how smart they are, and then by benefit, you become smarter. So those are my 3 ideas for you. And that applies to all of you, whatever your beat is, right? Just always talk to somebody every day who's an expert.
And I'll just take a moment to introduce, this is Glenn Hall. He's with the Wall Street Journal. Glenn, pardon me, I've forgotten your exact title, Global Chief of Newswires or something. Global Poobah, Global Poobah, I don't know.
Yeah, Poobah, that's what they call me. How did you know?
Anyway, Glenn is one of my colleagues on the SABEW board, and he does a lot of hiring, so he's got some great perspective. So thank you, Glenn. Just kind of wanted to make that introduction to everybody.
Yeah, I forgot that we don't have little cards anymore on these virtual things. So yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely agree on talking to experts. And the other thing too I would add to that is, look, I mean, when you're starting out on something, your obvious weakness is you're not well sourced yet, right? That will come with time. But the other obvious pro that I think some people often maybe lose sight of is you're coming in with fresh eyes, and that can be an advantage too. And learning and seeing, hey, my competitors are doing this, this, and this. Ask your source at the end of a call, what aren't they doing? What could I do? That, to your point of how do I stand out? What isn't anybody else doing? And is there a good reason for that? Or is it just people are not doing that? And try to think about that too. Be mindful of that. Anybody else want to throw out a question, a comment?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So my name is Coral. I'm the incoming fellow at the New York Times at the business desk. So maybe you guys know Rich, who I think is in the board. And he recommended this conference to me, and it was really great. And I guess my question was, I'm starting in June, but we're starting remotely. And I was just wondering, what are some best practices to, get your foot in the door virtually, but and have a good rapport with your boss, but it's virtual. It's not the same, day to day. I see you at the office, and we might have, the typical water cooler conversations, and even maybe after work have a cup of coffee or a lunch break. What's the best way to do it virtually, especially when you're starting out virtually?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I will preface this by saying I would love to hear other people's thoughts because I have struggled mightily with this the past 4 months myself. So I can totally relate to you in that sense. For me, starting here at BI, a company of I think almost 800 people, if you go all in, I knew one person sort of coming in. That was it. Like it was very jarring. Like I don't know how you are, but like me personally, I'm like very social. Like in normal times, I would have had like a dozen colleagues to my house ready for a barbecue. You know what I mean? Like I'm used to kind of making fast friends at the office. So it's been really difficult. I think a couple of things, is like sort of whatever kind of extracurricular informal activities that the newsroom is offering in terms of like a book club. I know we have one of those, or a Slack room dedicated to dogs, or whatever, anything that is like fun on the side, like that you're even maybe mildly interested in, to Glenn's point to just sort of throw your hand up and join things that way, and try to set up coffee calls with people. I've done that. I've tried to do that about once a week here with mixed success, because of course you're trying to do that with sources too, and that's kind of more important in some ways. But I think just trying to do your best to be really outgoing. But I would love to hear other people's thoughts because it's really difficult. I don't know if anyone else here has started a job in the last year, pandemic wise, but that would probably be a prereq, I guess.
The corollary to my just say yes is just ask. You were talking about meeting with your new boss, right? So, invite yourself to a meeting. Just say, hey, look, I'd really love to be able to maybe set up a weekly or every other week meeting so that I'm, getting feedback and I want to grow and learn. And, could you spare 15 minutes even every week for me? That'd be really great. And, I don't know any boss who'd say, no, I don't want to meet with you ever.
I see Cheska Antonelli on the line. She's with Bloomberg. Cheska, you do a lot of hiring. You're a boss. Do you have any? And she's also another colleague on the SABEW board. Did you want to pipe in any ideas?
Yeah, I was going to say we've hired probably 20 people over the past 14 months. It is a really difficult question, but I think one of the people we hired did something that I thought was really smart, in that she asked everyone she met what the least busy time of the week was, so that she could reach out to editors, and she would just kind of keep a list of who said what, and then like not always ping that person at that time, but ping a couple of people at that time, and then see like, oh, okay, well, Friday afternoons, late in the afternoon, I can actually get through to people if I ping them on on the instant chat, or if I Teams call them and take 5 minutes, or I can always circle back after the edit of a story and be like, hey, when can we talk about this? I loved this change you made, and like preface it in a really positive way, and then like start digging deeper in that way that only reporters can. But I thought that was a really smart move, to just be asking everyone when it's least busy, and then trying to see if those people were accurately.
One thing
I like that one a lot.
Yeah, I found it works well too if you can. And Coral, I'm not sure like what the pace of the business desk will be and how much access you'll have, but I found just on the editor side, it's helpful to have like a routine check-in, similar to what Cheska said. Like I'll kind of ask a new reporter, an intern, like we'll set up a daily check-in, like a quick phone call. And if you can't do it every week, every day, maybe it's every week. And that way you've got time on the calendar with Rich or whomever your supervisor is, to talk about not only what you're doing and what the day looks like ahead, but you've got that time to check in and things you wondered about, or being new. Yeah, there's a lot of learning the culture and the routine and things like that. So if you've got like a 15-minute slot that is just pre-booked, depending on your editor's willingness to do that, it just gives you that automatic check-in time, and you can tick off a few items on your list and also get to know him or her a little bit personally as well. I'll mention that I saw Cheska put something in the message chat about a healthcare reporter job. So I don't want to take over Matt's great job of moderating, but if people may be interested in hearing about that, and then we can hand it back over to me.
Absolutely.
Sure. Yeah, we're hiring a healthcare regulation reporter. We're going to post the job later this week. So early heads up for everyone who went to the SABEW conference. So if you are in the Washington, D.C. area and you love healthcare policy and regulation, feel free to reach out. Or one of the reporters on the team is actually on the call, Shira Stein. So maybe she wants to say hello and talk about what she does.
Oh, sure, I can do that. Not an editor putting me on the spot. I'm the AG reporter at Bloomberg Law. So I cover basically everything in healthcare. And this person, I think, is mostly going to cover the Affordable Care Act. And so we'll be working together a lot. The Affordable Care Act is, always really interesting to cover. There's always a lot happening, especially during the Biden administration. ACA and its expansion is a huge thing. So it's a really exciting time to, it's obviously a really exciting time to cover healthcare, but it's a really exciting time to cover the Affordable Care Act. So just a little plug.
Yep. Thanks for that, Shira. Good to be on the spot. Sorry, Matt, back to you.
No, not at all. No, it sounds like a great gig. Anybody else have anything that they want to touch on, or I could talk about one of the other sort of like talking points we put out there, but does anybody else want to jump in with a comment or a question first?
Yeah, I'll pop in with a question. Sorry, I have to balance SABEW with my job right now. I'm on deadline in like 2 hours. So the job I currently landed at, it was, I didn't have a lot of time to actually meet people in person, but for the past 2 years or so, I'm going to be 27 in August. And the second youngest person in the company, the entire company, is turned 37 today. Everyone else is in their late 40s, early 50s. Someone's in their 70s. I don't know if anyone else has had to deal with that, but I'm curious how to deal with like such a rapid age gap, because I definitely feel like I've been, I wouldn't say talked down to specifically, but there's definitely like a difference in like culture and how people, talk between that age limit, and it's very difficult to navigate after the past 2 jobs I've had where, the majority of the newsroom was like in their 20s and 30s, and there was much more of a broader mix of age.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a tricky one. I don't think I personally experienced that. I've actually, if anything, right now I'm experiencing the opposite. I mean, I'm 32 for reference. A lot of my company is very young. I'm also though kind of like an old soul. Like I was sort of born 40, so I'm really probably more like 72 right now. So I don't know that I'm a great person to answer that, but I think I would start, if you haven't already, by talking to your boss and mentioning that, like, hey, you know, this is something I've been thinking about, or that's been an issue. I'd like to talk about it more. Or if you're not comfortable talking to your direct boss, HR or something. I mean, I do know what you mean about, you know, of course, context and cultural differences and things like that. Of course, generations are different. So I think I have a sense of what you mean there. And I guess my advice, just at a high level, would just be to kind of try to be as best you can, you know, kind of open and transparent about it, and to just sort of try and talk about it internally and start a conversation. And you know, you're probably not going to be in control of hiring someone, so you know, it's not like it's gonna, you know, the company's gonna change like that overnight. But I think bringing it up would be the first step. I don't know if you've done that already. And anyone else, I think, should feel free to jump in here too. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks.
Yeah. Sorry, not have a better answer for that. It's a tough one.
I would just add, Dan, I think it's real. You know, at the Journal, we've got a lot of long timers, and you know, they have a great deal of institutional knowledge, but they don't always have their finger on the pulse of the times. And there's a lot to that, right? And so you have to, I guess my advice would be, and what you're talking about is real. And I think, you know, it's all part of, you know, all of us have our unconscious biases, you know, and we have to be mindful of it. And it's something, you know, the world is coming to grips with now in a bigger way. So that's the good news. But the bad news is some of it's on each of us individually, right? And that's going to be a challenge. But I think you and each of you have strengths and knowledge that are yours and yours alone. And that's where your expertise comes in. And, you know, my best advice to all of you is, and this goes back to something that Matt was saying earlier, develop your special expertise, the area where you know more than other people around you, and you will shine. I guarantee that you will shine when you are seen as the most knowledgeable person on something that you've grabbed, right? So I'll give you just one example in my world. So I run the Newswires team, as Kim mentioned, and so we're the run and gun news makers, and we don't often get the big story because we hand those over to the Wall Street Journal's beat reporter, right? And so I have a lot of folks on my team who are about your age, and you know, they struggle with this same thing, not necessarily being disrespected, but getting the attention, getting the opportunity that they feel like always goes to somebody else, right? And so, you know, one of them, you know, very ambitious young man like yourself, noticed that nobody was covering the cruise industry at the beginning of this pandemic and just started to cover it for The Wire, and then got noticed, and the stories were picked up and taken by the Journal. And now the Journal's calling him because he's got all the sources in the cruise industry, because nobody at the Journal was covering the cruise industry until he grabbed it and took it for his own. So that's another way where you just take something and own it, and I think you'll find respect follows from that, and opportunity follows from that. This is my best advice for you. But don't despair. And I know it's true what you're going through, you know, and I've seen it. So we all have to certainly, as managers, guard against it and create open, free spaces for everybody. But you can also create some space for yourself in the process too. So I agree with what Matt said. Talk to your boss for sure. Make sure it's clear and non-confrontational. You're just feeling this way, but then go out and kick some ass.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
Anybody else have any question or comment that's on their mind? We also mentioned, you know, we've talked, I think, a lot about, a little bit at least, about standing out in a crowd. We're just talking about that, sort of establishing yourself. Does anybody want to talk about any particular skills that they're considering or wondering if they should pick up, or anything along those lines? Is that a sort of a vein that we want to dive into? Anybody? that could be a beat, area of expertise. When I say skills, I mean things like being a document nerd, being at least proficient or self-sufficient with data, things like that, or radio production or things like that. Does anybody have any questions or comments on that? And we could also just skip it.
Yeah, I can ask about that real quick. I joined SABEW through the Dow Jones News Fund, which is like a training program for young journalists, I suppose is the best way to describe it. And they talked about last year, they talked about like data journalism and how that's like growing. And then certain like languages, I suppose, like R and Python and whatnot. I'm wondering if any of you all are proficient in that and or would recommend that. And then I guess going off that, like, is that a worthwhile skill that's worth me pursuing, or are there other more valuable ways I can spend my time? Because again, I remember I read down someone said you can't be an expert in everything. And I think that's something I'm really trying to, I guess, struggling with is like, where do I want to focus my time and resources and carve out a niche for myself? So thank you in advance.
Yeah. Yeah, I can speak to that, and I would also love others too to jump in. I mean, I guess my initial thoughts are, some of it I think should come from you, because that's what you're going to be most passionate about. So, I think it's smart to sort of ask and try to think about, things like long-term, marketability and viability for yourself and getting a job and what will make you stand out. But ideally, whatever that leads you to is also something you're pretty psyched about, and you really want to do, because otherwise it may be kind of a drag. Like I don't speak a second language, for example. I wish I did. It's probably one of my biggest regrets about school. I could go do that tomorrow. I don't have the motivation. I wish I had, but it's like one of these nagging regrets. Maybe I will someday. But I think it really just depends on where you want to see yourself, and to the best you can, try to think a few years out. And like to your question on Python or R, yes, those are skills that are used in a lot of newsrooms today, if not most. But in my experience, in most of the cases, skills like that are pretty separate, or at least somewhat separate from a reporter, or you coming in as a fellow at BI. So I don't know that I would necessarily recommend that first. I do think data journalism, as in being a master at Excel, being comfortable with relational databases, so Access, SQL, I think those are much more widespread in terms of demand and usability personally than actually coding. Usually, the coding team is somewhat separate. Obviously, places like the New York Times, people who code are also journalists, but many places they're not really. So it kind of depends on where you are. And it also just depends, I think, on where you want to be. And you will sort of figure that out as you go. If you don't know that all now, obviously that's okay. But to just sort of try new things too. To Glenn's earlier point, raise your hand to try new things. And if nothing else, you will learn a little bit about yourself by trying a new thing. Maybe you hate it, but you'll learn that you hate it.
I'd also chip in, you don't necessarily also have to know, for example, Python or R, although it's pretty easy to learn those languages. I think Swirl is a pretty easy way to learn R, like in media res. But I kind of carved a little bit of a niche right off the gate, because I was able to figure out ways of other services that already exist and just suggest them to people as they saw fit. So when I first got to my current job, everyone had this long like text file of like specific strings of all the cities we cover and everything that they were trying to find to put into Edgar in the SEC. And it always produced these super messy searches that like the documents were sometimes, not where you were looking for. It was a huge mess. And I just suggested, and if you guys don't know Scoop, which is spelled SQOOP, they're an SEC document scraper where you can set the specific geography of addresses that you want to pull from. So I just showed them how to use that, and that's how we get SEC filings, and that catches probably 95% of the filings that we ever look up, and then the rest we just sign up for direct IR emails. So that's also something, and I think Pointer's Ren LaForme, I think his name is. They've got Try This, which is a newsletter, which is just all of these cool little tools that you might be able to apply. So it's not exactly the same thing as being is having proficiency in Python or another language, but it's definitely something that you can apply if you're kind of in that middle space where you may have like a dedicated coding team, or you may just kind of be on your own. You have to like do all this data on the fly.
Yeah, let me give the pro case for the R and Python coding. So I've run teams of journalists who code before. I think that the mix of skills in those teams really varies quite greatly. But if you are the kind of person who really likes math, if you are someone who picked up HTML easily, you might want to consider it, because it really does set you apart in the newsroom. There are places like Bloomberg and the New York Times that do have entire teams of people who produce data journalism and interactive graphics and work on projects. It can be a good way into a project's kind of role, but you have to be super detail oriented, and you have to basically want to work with data sets that are larger than what you could handle in Excel all the time, right? So it takes a certain kind of person. If you get into a team of people who are journalists who code and you know how to write, that will give you a different skill set, right? As someone who's managed teams like this, I think that the personality of a lot of the reporters on that team is a little different than your lean-in, source-driven reporter personality. And then to the point of like what you bring to the table in that team can be very different, and you can be teaching the people who know more about the engineering side than you and learning from them at the same time, right? And it becomes a very great like holistic environment, because not a lot of data reporters enjoy picking up the phone, right? They may enjoy interrogating the data set or the person who put the data set together, but talking to real humans to get the anecdote for those stories, it can be difficult, right? So if you've already got that skill set and you're looking to flesh it out with more data reporting, it can make you a very versatile person in a small newsroom, or a really good member of a larger data team, right? So I think that's something that a lot of managers are looking for. If you have experience with R or Python, it can help you get an interview. But like to get a job as a data reporter at a real top tier institution, you have to have a lot of body of work and be able to talk through your projects. So you're going to want to be doing things on your own for a while and trying to stretch in the newsroom that you're in already. But it can be a really fun environment. The teams that are made up of journalists who also code are incredibly fun, incredibly collaborative. It's a good place to be.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you just said, Jessica. And one thing that I often encourage folks to do is just in general, and that was a great example of this, but just with anything really on your job, I think framing a story, how you present a story, trying to be at the intersection of two or more things is a really good place to be. So whether it's an intersection of skills or an intersection of beats or an intersection of whatever, the story is more appealing to a broad audience. You are sort of like a little bit of the odd duck in the room in a way, kind of like to Jessica's point on some of these teams. I've seen that as well, but that's a good thing. You can sort of speak across the aisles, and I think to the extent you can do that in anything with your job I would almost always encourage. Someone asked, James asked about which languages would you want to be proficient in for business finance reporting. I assume you mean languages like spoken languages, or is this coding? I'm not sure. If it's spoken language, I mean, I think it just depends on what you cover or where you are. I mean, I'm in California, so Spanish or Mandarin would be the two most obvious things, but that just really depends on where you are, I think. I mean, obviously there's so much US, China relations right now in the business world. Like, I think that's probably what I would recommend, Mandarin. But if it's coding, I'm probably not the guy to ask. But I would defer to others in the room now.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Let's see. I mean, one thing I think that comes up a lot, I don't know if anybody here wants to talk about this, but is just sort of balancing, I sort of alluded to this a little bit, but balancing deeper dive, really ambitious enterprise investigative work with your daily beat, assuming you have one. Does anybody have any questions about that, or is curious or wants to talk about that or dive into that at all?
I guess,
Yeah.
hey, hello. I guess I'd like to jump in with a little bit of a thought there. I guess one of my problems right now is I don't have a daily beat. And what was good in the past, which has been being able to cover kind of whatever I wanted, is now I kind of like, I need more of a focus. And so I wind up doing a lot of reporting, and less gets published in my outlets. And I kind of miss, I remember being in New York City one year, and Glenn, you probably don't remember, but I remember you gave me your card, and I remember just bouncing a few things off you, some questions I had about sources, and I guess I just miss like having having people to kind of bounce this stuff off, whereas as a freelancer, one of my outlets right now, it's a young staff, and the editor has right now it's not full time. He has another job, so I'm in a place where I'm deciding whether to focus, more on content marketing or really stick with the business journalism, which I obviously want to do. I want to find, an area.
Yeah, that's. I imagine that's harder too as a freelancer. I've have very little experience as a freelancer, so I don't know that I'm the best equipped to speak to that. But I mean, in my day job, I've run into that, and I've had situations where I pitch my boss like, hey, here's how we sort of define loosely my beat, which is very loose, so I can relate to you in that sense. What if we did like this for the next 6 months, and just sort of looked at that and see what happens, and if that's productive when you run with it. So maybe try on a new beat for a little bit, and worst case, it's like if you hate it, you're sort of back where you started. But then also I would say thinking strategically, like if this were what a year ago or so, I would have said maybe if you're into SPACs, write about SPACs, early on. I could try and glom onto something that appears to be taking off. I mean, right now, this healthcare beat is probably a good example of this job opening of like, hey, there's a new administration. That means a lot of things for a lot of industries. Is there something in there that you're interested in, or that is, pertinent to your contacts in your freelance world or your local community where you're based? Yeah, it could mean a lot of different things, but it's tough. Yeah, focus is hard.
So the thought is, Matt, that I should just sort of like create my own little beat right now. And I mean, obviously I can speak to people about it. I could, but it's,
yeah.
As the business journalist, it's got to come, from me, right?
I think so. I mean, as a freelancer, it's all about marketability, right? So some of it is what you think they would be interested in next month and in 6 months, and you want them to say yes to your pitch, right? So I think it is a conversation, but I think having an idea or two or three maybe in your preface, in your order of, okay, I'm most interested in this, and then this, and then that, as like it's not even a beat, just like an area, like a sandbox that you want to play in, I know beat sometimes as a word can feel a little constricting for some folks. Others, they really like that. It just sort of depends on the personality of the reporter. But yeah, I think you should define it, because I don't think anyone's going to do it for you. I think it's got to come from you. And worst case, you pick something that you're not that excited about. Again, you're kind of back where you are today.
I'll offer a thought for you, Dave, that I think if I were in your scenario and thinking about my marketability as a freelancer, I would think in terms of more of a horizontal beat instead of a vertical beat. And what I mean by that is, instead of healthcare, where a lot of places are going to have their healthcare reporter, it's an expertise that they want. If you had an expertise in cybersecurity, that's a horizontal beat. It crosses every industry. And so it allows you to go and pitch your stuff to a lot of different types of news outlets, but cybersecurity being your special sauce around that. And that's a very topical one. Artificial intelligence is one where there's not really a beat reporter on that per se. We have some at the Journal, but not everybody does. But that's something that crosses all kinds of industries and all kinds of topics. So if you think about expertise in that way, I think it creates opportunities for you that you can pitch in a lot of different places, but you still develop your own expert knowledge.
Yeah, thank you.
How are we doing on time here? Does anybody have any other questions they want to talk through? Any topics that we haven't hit on that people are really hoping to talk about?
I think we've got about 5 minutes left.
Okay. I mean, I can give you my little shtick, my pitch, which I encourage business reporters to do all the time. And Kim, you know this. We, when I did a virtual presentation last year, it was about this, which is documents, and specifically public documents. I think a lot of business reporters underutilize public documents. I think in my experience, a lot of my colleagues tend to think like, hey, I don't write about the government. Like, why do I need to think about FOIA? Which I think is I get why someone might think that, but I think is also misguided. And I think there are tons and tons and tons of touch points between federal, state, local government, international government, and business. Entire teams at these companies that interact with the government, lawyers who are some of your best sources anyway, no matter what. I just think that public records is a really vast, and for I think a couple reasons that really are not that big of a deal, just underutilized in business reporting. So I would, as far as like a skill set or just sort of something to make your special sauce or your thing, I would welcome more people to come on the public records bandwagon. I think it is, in my experience, editors really value that. And, I teach colleagues how to do it here. And it's just something that I think is, no matter what you cover, cybersecurity, whatever, it can be useful. So I would throw that out there too. Yeah. Trying to read through the chat to see if I missed anything. Duolingo, yeah. I've had like 5 friends tell me the same thing about Duolingo. It's supposed to be amazing. I need to check that out. I think it's pretty cheap too. Yeah. Well, if anybody has any last questions. Oh, I should also say too, I mean, I hope people have felt comfortable asking questions. This has been fun, but also if you weren't and you want to ask me something later, that's totally fine. I'm super easy to find on the internet. Matt Range, you'll find any way to contact me. My cell phone is out there. Just hit me up anytime. And
I would just encourage everybody on behalf of SABEW to think of us as your network all the time, not just at the conferences. We have our emails posted. There's a member directory for members. You can even create your own subgroup of freelancers if you wanted, Dave, and get to know some of the others who are and compare notes. But we're one of the things we do well is network, and at these events usually made it a lot easier. But it does require more effort. But the SABEW community is still there to help.
Yeah,
Oh,
I
great,
experienced
yeah.
that firsthand last year, talking to Kim and others about my job search. I completely agree with Glenn on that.
Kind of sounds silly. Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Glenn. I would like that. It sounds silly, but where is your email posted? Because I was actually looking for your
member
card.
directory. People like myself include their emails. It's voluntary. You can look people up. Those of us who are on the board, if you go in the About Sabu section, you'll find our emails and other information. And mine's super easy. It's glenn.hall@wsj.com.
Yeah, and I welcome if anyone wants to reach out. It's just the letter K and then Quillen@chicagotribune.com. And I'm on LinkedIn and all that as well. So awesome. I think this has been a really great. I really appreciate everyone's willingness to toss out some questions and chew over some of these topics. I really appreciate everyone just kind of engaging in this conversation, and really special thanks to Matt Drange. I knew that he would be the perfect person to lead this, and I just so appreciate, Matt, you taking the time to kind of walk us through some of these issues and kind of serve as a host and a directional force in this conversation. So you've done a great job, and we really appreciate it.
Thanks, Kim. Man, thanks everybody for coming. Great to meet you all, and hopefully next year we're in person, and I'll buy you a drink or something. We can chat more.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. And to everyone who's still on, I think the next thing on the agenda, if you want to listen in, is SABEW is announcing the results of the Best in Business Awards at 5 p.m. Eastern. You can find that link through the SABEW site, the same site you've been using all day. So if you want to take a quick break and check that out, that should be very interesting. So, but thank you again very much, Matt, and thank you to each of you for coming and kind of bringing your thoughts and your questions. I think this has been really terrific. So I've enjoyed meeting each of you.
Thank you all again. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Good luck with your your job, your start.
Thank you, Ken. Much appreciated. Thanks.
Yeah, hit me up on Slack when you're here.
Will do. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care, everybody.
Bye, guys.